Hello to this lecture today. I'm Helena Gerdener. I'm a PhD student at the Institute of Geodesy and Geoinformation at the University of Bonn. And this lecture today is out of the learning block Total Water Storage Change Analysis from GRACE and Hydrological Modeling. Today we concentrate on the GRACE part because the last lecture was about hydrological modeling. So we want to give an overview of the GRACE satellite mission and show its potentials and limitations for hydrological monitoring. The objectives of this lecture are that we introduce GRACE into the GlobeDrought Project, and we will show the GRACE satellite mission, show some examples for GRACE-based drought indicators, and at the end we will show some potentials and limitations of GRACE. So the GlobeDrought Project is a project that is funded by the Federal Ministry for Education and Research, and we aim to develop a web-based drought information system, and we are doing so by computing drought risk, and we consider the components hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. The hazard part is consisting out of different drought types, for example, meteorological drought, but also hydrological drought, and this drought type is the one that we consider here. Hydrological drought can be described by using model outputs, but also by using real data derived from the GRACE satellite mission. So to have a short reminder about hydrological drought, we look at the deficiency in a specific water storage. This can be, for example, stream flow, lakes, but also groundwater and other storages. So we compare the degree of dryness in these storages to the defined normal. Last lecture, Petra Döll introduced the global water cycle to you. So she really nicely explained the different storages, for example, freshwater sources. But she also mentioned that in situ stream flow measurements and groundwater measurements are difficult to retrieve. We have another problem. For example, if you look at stream flow and you want to detect droughts for hydrology, it can be then that the drought is in a different storage, for example, in the groundwater, and it then can be that you miss the drought. So what we do now is that we look at a grid cell, for example, on the ground, and then we take all storages that are in this grid cell and sum it up. So we have surface water, snow, soil, groundwater, and sum it up to have, at the end, total water storages. And these total water storages can be derived by the GRACE satellite mission. So this is a big potential that we have from the GRACE satellite mission. So now I introduce the satellite mission to you. GRACE means Gravity, Recovery, and Climate Experiment. This means we measure gravity field measurements, and we are especially interested in the time variable gravity field. And then we convert these gravity field measurements to monthly total water storage anomalies. The mission was developed by NASA, DLR, and GFZ, and it was launched in 2002 in March. And originally it was planned that the mission lasts 5 years, but at the end it lasted 3 times longer. We had at the end a 15 years mission. The follow-on mission is called GRACE Follow-On and launched in 2018, and we have first gravity field data available since June 2019, so since this year. And the mission is likely slightly better in its spatial resolution than the GRACE mission. When you look at the dates now, you see that we have a gap in between the GRACE mission and the GRACE Follow-On mission. So there is a lot of research about how to fill the gap, because it is important for researchers to have continuous time series and long time series. Now I want to explain the principle of the gravity field measurements. So we have 2 satellites that are flying on the same orbit, and one satellite is flying behind the other satellites. When we have a mass now, for example, a mountain with snow, we start flying, and the first satellite gets attracted by the mass, so it gets faster. Then later the second satellite also gets attracted by the mass, and when we're flying over the mountains, we have satellites that are a little bit slower. Then when they fly on, we have the first satellite that is then again faster, and later the second satellite is also faster. And due to the time, we measure the distance between the satellites. So we directly can get from the distance measurements between the satellites to the gravity field. Yeah, so this satellite gravimetry is the only remote sensing technology that is capable of directly quantifying water mass distributions in the Earth system, but also other mass distributions. And GRACE provides us a groundbreaking insight into many processes in hydrology and glaciology, oceanography, and earth sciences. I already explained that we have gravity field measurements from the satellite mission, but we need to transform these measurements to total water storage anomalies. So there are many steps in between that we need to do for the post-processing, and these are done at our institute. We won't go into detail here because this would take too much time. So from the total water storage anomalies, then you can get different hydrological signals as, for example, trends. These trends reveal climate change, variability, and anthropogenic activities. So you see, for example, here in northern part of India that we can see pumping and irrigation. In Western Africa, we can see a reservoir. Southern America, we have the ENSO signal, so this is a climate phenomenon. And we can also see some melting of the glaciers and melting in Greenland here. So what we also can do with our total water storage anomalies is now that we analyze the drought according to the signals. We can do this by looking at the time series itself, but we also can compute drought indicators. And these indicators help us in describing severity, location, timing, and duration of the drought. And there are existing a few indicators, but here we will show two examples. The first indicator is the DSI, so the Drought Severity Indicator by Zhao et al. And it was computed from total water storage anomalies on global level. And the second indicator is the Hoburg et al. Indicator. They used the integration of GRACE data into a hydrological model, and then they computed indicators out of it. This was done for parts of Northern America. Yeah. So here we describe the methodologies of the two GRACE-based indicators now. The first indicator by Zhao et al. Uses a standardization method. So we took our actual value and compare it to all values that are in the same month. So for example, if you have January 2004, we take all January values and take the average of it and compare it to our actual value. We then also look at the standard deviation of these values. And at the end, we get an output that can be categorized into drought severity levels. So for example, we have abnormal drought or even worse drought, for exceptional drought. Then the second indicator is the Hoburg indicator. He uses a percentile rank method. And this means that we count the number of values that fall below our actual value. And then we divide it by the number of total values for that month. Yeah, and we again have the advantage that we have severity classes for these outputs. So we saw from these two indicators and from different literature reviews that GRACE has great potential to describe hydrological drought, but GRACE has also some challenges. When you look at the map now here for Australia, you see in the southeastern part that precipitation there is very local. This means that drought can also be very local. When you compare it now to the GRACE map, you see that the signal is much more smooth, and this means that the smoothness is maybe too coarse for using it in drought monitoring and forecasting systems. What we do now is that we integrate GRACE into hydrological models, but this is part of the webinar. So there are other challenges now for GRACE. and open questions that we need to answer. But these questions that come up now are more questions that are generally relevant for all types of indicators, so also for meteorological indicators or soil moisture indicators. Yeah. So the first question is, which computation of spatial average do we want to use? We can, for example, use the spatial average of total water storage changes or the spatial average of the indicator output. So both methods lead to different results, and we need to find out which result is the more realistic one. Then we also have some temporal resolution questions. So should we use a temporal weighting, or which input period for indicator computation should we take? And we do not know which type of drought periods do we want to look at. Do we want to look at persistent or temporary droughts? And at the end, we should answer the question how to validate all these. These questions also lead to the main question, which indicator is the best one. But I think at this time you cannot answer this question, but because this always depends on the application. So what we did now is that we developed a synthetic framework to find out how the indicators are biased by grace-based signals. So we took our real grace data, analyze it according to containing signals, for example, trends and spatial noise, and made a synthetic time series out of it. Then we added a drought signature where we know how long the drought is and how intense the drought is. And when we put the time series now into the indicator, we know what the outcome should be. So we can then see if a trend or the spatial noise of grace biases our indicator analysis. Yeah, these results were all summarized in a paper, and this is now open for discussion. So it's a discussion paper in Hess. Yeah, so let's come to the conclusion. We saw that GRACE offers a great possibility to observe hydrological drought via remote sensing, and we have the advantage that we can have measurements that also include groundwater and difficult to retrieve measurements. Yeah, then we have shown that we have a framework to detect biasing signals for the drought detection. And as next, we want to combine GRACE with model outputs, but this is content of the webinar. And at the end, I want to remind you to go to the discussion forum, which is now open to share questions or to have just discussions. And we have a webinar according to this lecture, and which is also about the same topic. And the next learning block is about soil moisture drought.